The Gentleman Gamer invited us to respond with stories of scenes in games or systems which, as he put it, opened our eyes or showed us something that we weren't at that time aware of in gaming. So I started to think, well, what were those things? And of course, I think the biggest one likely was my first or second session running Call of Cthulhu. The caution, which I had become used to seeing in players when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons or Palladium Fantasy or any of the other systems that we tried, the caution when entering combat was expected. I played with good players. I played with players who paid attention, who had decent tactics, and one of whom had excellent strategy. And so I was used to cautious and successful gameplay. When I started running Call of Cthulhu for the group, what I saw was fear. And that was an eye-opening experience. Part of it was the fact that we were playing a new system, and much of what we were experiencing was completely unknown. But part of it was something else, and it would take a long time before I pieced together what that something else was. But in the beginning, a lot of what it was that the system was enabling the players and me to let go and experience this kind of emotional and mental environment in a different way than our previous games had encouraged us to do. And part of this was the emphasis on description for the sake of atmosphere, for the sake of generating an emotional response, not an intellectual or tactical response, or not a, let's say, beating the encounter kind of response. And as an example of this, by the time I was writing my own material with a view to building a campaign, which would be maybe the third or fourth full session that I ran, not like a one-shot, but sitting down with consistent characters moving through. I had purchased the famous Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign, and I really wanted to run it, but I also wanted to give everyone a fair shake. And so I prepared a short series of adventures that would tie in, that would connect them to some NPCs in that campaign and build up some sense of reality and investment in the world. I didn't really notice or realize what effect that would have long term, but I certainly noticed as it was paying off. What I was focusing on was one particular scene. I wanted to see what the denial of certain kind of input combined with complete and utter honesty, or a complete ability to interact with realia, with real artifacts in the game session would have. So here's what I did. As they're investigating a disappearance within a manor house, they come to a locked door, and they're brought there by the butler, who will not go any further. And as they're standing at the door, the light level that I'm describing in the game world is going down. And I timed this more out of wishful thinking than anything else with the actual sunset. So I would have missed it had my plans gone the way I had intended, but thankfully life doesn't work that way. And so because of delays getting the game going for various reasons, as they reach this scene, the actual sun was actually setting, so it's getting darker in the room. So they're standing in this hallway, which I'm describing as uncomfortably dark. The room is getting uncomfortably dark, and I describe that in front of the door there's this dark stain in the thick fabric of the rug. and they want to know, what is it? So I describe its feel, I describe its smell, I start making comparison to real world things, and ultimately, as they keep asking, and they're so afraid to go through this door, I finally go into the kitchen. In the kitchen, I get a piece of paper, and I pour molasses on this piece of paper, and I let it, sit for a minute. And then when I'm ready, I go back in. Now the room is pretty much completely dark, and the players are just sitting there in the darkness, and it's really too dark to read character sheets or anything like that. And so I'm describing how dark and uncomfortable it is, and in character they ask the butler for light, and I provide them with a lit candle, and give a nod to one of the other players to go around and light more candles. So now we have this soft flickering light, and I present them with this molasses. And they keep asking me, what is this stain like? And I say, well, it's sticky. It has this sharp smell, and it looks, well, it doesn't look, it smells exactly like this. And as they kept asking, I kept relying on saying, it's exactly like this. But at no point was the connection made by any of the players, all of them very clever people, that what I was describing soaked into the fabric of the hallway rug was actually molasses. They had convinced themselves it was some kind of otherworldly ichor, and that's what it was going to be. And so they really didn't want to go into this room. But finally, one of the players said, well, this is ridiculous. If we don't go into the room, how can we call ourselves the missing man's friends? So they go back downstairs and they get all the useless paraphernalia that new Call of Cthulhu investigators will get, shotguns and the like. And they go back up to the door, they investigate the ichor one more time, and then they go into the room. And what did they discover? An upturned barrel of molasses. Of course, later on, they found the body of their friend stuffed into one of his desk drawers like a beanbag full of jam. But that's a story for another day. So what this showed me, once and for all, was that I, as the keeper, was not scaring the players. The players scare themselves, and this lesson has helped me in almost every other game I've run since then. Now, I've spent a lot of time running horror-themed games, from the World of Darkness through Call of Cthulhu or Nephilim or Elric. There are elements of horror which creep in, but even outside of these games based on fear, the idea that whatever emotion you're trying to evoke comes from the players. It's not given to them or projected onto them by the game master. This has truly helped me run games that we still talk about years or even decades now, because we're also old, later. The game master facilitates the mood, but the players create it.